tonight in the name of all that is good, all that is holy, and all that is sacred, and in the warm and loving energy of this ministry, Spiritual Life Center. If you're with us for the very first time tonight or live streaming for the very first time, we especially welcome you because we know that you are not here by accident. We are all here by divine appointment. And we're really excited about our program tonight. And I'd like to introduce Paul Sanchez. He is one of our chaplains, and he is going to help us sing. He is going to he is going to lead us in our opening prayer.
Don't do that again. Hello? Is it on? Okay, thank you.
Go ahead.
Okay. Let's take a breath. Clear our minds. And inhale. And feel that sweet Spirit of God go through us from our sinuses, our nose, into our heart. And feel it swirl around. Breathe God in. And even feel your feet grounded into whatever they're grounded into Mother Earth, sinking deep into earth, and feel that connection. Divine Spirit, we thank you for this evening where we feel grounded into what is holy, what is sacred. Wherever we stand is sacred ground, and knowing that we are fully present, fully aware that we have a wonderful show tonight, not a show, presentation, journey. We share that journey in the name of all that is sacred and say, thank you, God. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Paul. Next week we have a special and kind of different thing going on. It's actually a soul spa sound immersion experience. And John Eldridge, he is the music minister at Unity of the Lake in Tahoe. Has anybody been up there and have anybody heard him? Yeah, well, he's going to come be with us next week, and he's good. And he will bring some of his original songs with us. And it says, sing along with powerful affirmations, slip into imaginative imagery, I can do this, and enjoy some humor about life and living through music. Warning, John's songs may get stuck in your head for a few days following the show, but you will recover. And so he will be with us next week. And then we have a special kind of thing we're going to do this year is, I know that, the holidays are coming and we'd like to decorate, but we want to just up the ante this year and really deck the halls. And so the decorating party will be on November 30th from 10 a.m. to noon. But before that, if you want to come around and donate some decorations so that we can really up the ante, we would really appreciate that. And you can bring the donations as up until November 20th, I think it is. So if you have some, you either find some decks at the dollar store that you want to bring in, or something at your house that you would like to share with us, please bring those. So, I'm excited about this interview. You hear people and you hear about, I haven't been through any of her classes, but you hear about what amazing teachers they are, and then I get to just talk and ask questions. So Teresa is a speaker, an author, a coach to all those seeking a more fulfilled life. Her cutting-edge program, Your Life's Design, provides participants with insights into the deep-rooted patterns that impede manifesting their true desires. Her dedication to leading the life of a spiritual warrior has involved being a lifelong learner and a practitioner of her own wisdom. The teachings exemplified in her book, Braving the Self, The Journey of a Spiritual Warrior. She has I ran that all together. She has an extraordinary defining ability to respond to her clients in both an intuitive and an applicable way. Many of Teresa's clients say that working with her has a profound and immediate impact in their life. She brings forth in her clients understanding in areas that were hidden from them, guiding them towards a greater fulfillment. Ladies and gentlemen, Teresa Campos.
Thank you.
Welcome to Talk the Walk, Teresa. Welcome to the new chairs.
Thank you.
So, the very first question that I like to ask people, because this is the Talk the Walk, which is about talking about how you've walked your own spiritual path, is did you grow up in any kind of a spiritual environment where you taught about God? Did you go to church? Any of that stuff?
I did. I would, but I'd like to qualify that and say that it was more of a religious experience that I had in terms of that I feel now when I look back on it that it was what my parents felt was the right thing to do, was to guide me along this path of attending like Catholic school for 12 years. And so I think that was just part of, what you do, because that's what they knew to do. Right. Yeah.
So what was that experience for you? I mean, we have many, many people in this congregation who had, came up through that path as well, and everyone had a different experience. So did you have a good relationship with the divine when you were growing up doing that thing, or did you? Yeah. How did that work for you?
Yeah, so, it's interesting because I don't have a lot of memory of my childhood, but I do remember this. And I remembered when I entered first grade at Our Lady of Fatima school, and I have this written in my book, is that the first time that my teacher, Mrs. Rude, that was her name, Mrs. Rude, that she introduced religion to us, I was taken back by it, and I remember thinking, does my mother know what she's telling us? Because it just didn't make sense to me as a small, as a first grader. And of course, you just go along with that. And over the course of really through grade school, I always had a conversation with God as I knew it, and I always questioned. I would question the nuns, and is like, why do I have to have faith, and how did God begin? And my questions were never answered. So I had a very struggled relationship with I'm going to say God. I'm using that word now because that was the word that I knew to identify. What I was being taught.
Yeah, because that was the only framework you had.
Absolutely.
And but at the same time, it sounds like you were having a conversation with Spirit.
Absolutely.
At the same, and so that's it's always kind of an interesting thing. So you had all of this dogma being rained upon you, and at the same time. And at this and hearing voices and and at the same time you're having this relationship with something that you can't see. Did that persist through high school and whatever, or did that start to change as you got older?
It started to change as I got older, and that's what was interesting is I realized later on in life that I was always having a conversation with God for so many years of my life, and I was negotiating all the time. And I'm going to say him because that was the context that I learned it to be, was him. So I was constantly negotiating, if I do this, will you give me this? And then I reached a point in my life where I wasn't getting those things that I wanted, and then I was like, I give up. I quit. I'm out. I got into high school, and because I no longer had to go to Mass, it was a choice, whereas in grammar school, you're forced, right? You go to Stations of the Cross every Friday during Lent, all of that sort of thing. I got to a point where it was like, well, I'm choosing not to have a conversation anymore. And that's when my conversations stopped, was when I got into high school.
Well, and that makes sense because lots of communication stops when you're a teenager, right? So where did you go from there spiritually? Did you go to college? When you finished high school, what was your next step?
My next step was to enter into beauty school. So that's where I knew my passion was, and my life just kind of took off from there in a direction that I had no idea that it would go into. And I ended up meeting at the time my husband, and I was 20 years old when I had my first child. So I never even got to finish beauty school. I went halfway through. I ended up getting pregnant, and that's where everything turned in a direction that I had no idea it was going to go into. And the interesting thing about that is that when I did have my daughter, my mother, they had gone out of my life for a period of time because they weren't agreeing with my choices, and that when I had my oldest daughter, my mother came to me and said, "Are you going to baptize her?" And the only thing I knew is that I didn't know what my beliefs were at that time, but I knew that wasn't my belief, and I didn't. And it created a lot of conflict between me and my mother because of that. You know, are you going to get married? Are you going to baptize? And that whole traditional thing. And I kept saying to myself, no, no, no. And yet I didn't know, I didn't even know really who I was at that time.
So which decade was this? The 80s?
This was the 80s. I was in
Okay.
81.
Okay, so people living together without benefit of clergy and
Right.
all of that was still, it was starting to become more common, but it was still not that usual. And then when you have a traditional family between the two of them, that must have been
Yes.
quite difficult for all of you, really.
Yeah, it was. And it was
Yeah.
interracial. So that was the other thing. So I was raised in a very strong Hispanic family, and then I went out of my race. And he was African American, and that was like, oh, that's a big taboo, right? And so, at least for the culture that I was raised in, so that also became part of the separation of family for me.
It sounds like you, you didn't do it intentionally, obviously, but it just sounds like you were on a path to get yourself as far away from all of that as you could.
Exactly. And so, like, the rebellion in first grade of saying, wait a minute, what are they teaching me? And then even the rebellion to choose somebody out of my ethnicity just to rebel against the cultural conditioning of that. And, you know, one of my aunts said, and I come from a pretty strong Hispanic family on both sides, 8 brothers and sisters from my parents, and one of my aunts said about me to one of her children, and that he told me later after she passed away, and this made me just feel like really validated. He said, you know, that I was the only one that had the nerve to stand up to everybody, and it really was about me choosing what I wanted, not what the family wanted for me.
Right, so but it wasn't like you were consciously going out of your way to do this. This is just who you were.
It's what was
right?
happening. Yeah.
It was just, this is how my life is, and this is what I'm going to do.
Exactly.
Yeah. So you have your first child, you're moving along in life. Where did it start to bring you back to whatever it brought you back to? Because the title of this is Why Didn't I Wait for God? So I'm really
Right.
curious to when we're going to get to that.
Yeah.
But so where did it start to meander? I'm guessing it meandered, or unless it was a sudden thing, but where did you start coming back around to a different kind of spirituality?
Well, it did meander. It was sudden, and and some people have heard me talk about this as when back in 1992, when my mother was diagnosed with ovarian cancer, and that came out of the blue like that for all of us. And it was when that happened that really changed me, and that was my spiritual awakening. That's what I consider to be my spiritual awakening, because it made me start asking the questions: who am I? Is there a God? What is the meaning of life? Because I felt so threatened by her experience. Number one, because the loss of the potential of losing my mother, and the second thing was that I look so much like my mother. My body type is so much like my mother. You know, I look like that whole side of the family, and it's like, oh, that could be me. I could have that. And my mother, 6 months and my mother died. So it was, from start to end, it was a pretty quick, progression. So much happened during that time, and so many teachers came in during that time, and books, and you guys know Louise Hay, all that type of stuff. And it was just the timing of it, of course, was so divinely orchestrated.
But how did you find out? I mean, so there's this Catholic background over here, and then when you start coming back into and looking for something, you went to Louise Hay. How did you find that? So what took you there?
Yeah, well, it started with Deepak Chopra, and a friend of mine who lived in Southern California, and I was here in Sacramento. He called me and he said, Teresa, I have a book that I think you need to read, and it's called Quantum Healing. And what I loved about that book is that it brought together spirituality and science. I had never been exposed to, physics, quantum physics that way. And so that was like, wait a minute. It started just to make me open up just a little bit. And then one of my cousins gave the book, You Can Heal Your Life, to my sister. My sister says, you should read this. And then it all just started to unfold from that point on.
Did you feel like you were just coming right home to what was really resonating with you? Or did you have to work at it?
Well, what was interesting is what I was really like determined to find out is why this happened to my mother. And of course, we ask that question, right? And that comes a lot from our victim. And that's initially where it came from, is why did this happen? But I think what happened for me is I went even deeper because it didn't make sense to me logically, like somebody who took care of her body, exercised, all that external thing, but my mind was still in that external place of how I saw life. And then when I started to get into these books, I started to realize that there was I knew that on some level, I knew there was something deeper underneath. It's like, it's not just that. It's not just what we put in our body. There's something more different. And these books started to answer those questions. And it's like, oh, I can't stop. Like, I'm on a mission here. I want to know how this whole thing works.
And so did you come to a point of making some sort of, I don't like this term, but I'm going to use it, peace with your mother's passing, that it at least made some sense to you, or?
It made complete sense to me. Okay. It made complete sense to me because when I started really studying about cancer and the second chakra and all of that with energy in the body, it's like, oh, it was like an epiphanies for me. I realized so much about her life and my life.
Wow. So it's amazing how having someone close to you leave the planet will be a trigger for such massive, massive change in your life.
Absolutely.
So where did you go from there? What was the next?
So then it made me really assess my personal life and what my relationship is. This is really what I want, because then I became into understanding about conscious choice. What am I choosing? What have I chosen? Is this really how I want to live my life? And I knew that when at 20, and then I did fall into the pressure of getting married. I didn't baptize my daughter, and for me, I felt like that was like my one thing I held on to, because I wasn't going to do it just because. But the piece of, I knew this, I feel bad saying it, but I'm going to say it. I knew when I was standing at the back of that kind of the runway of getting married, and it was at somebody's house. It was very simple. I knew that it wasn't going to last. I knew this wasn't going to be, what I knew it wasn't what I wanted.
You probably aren't the first person who did
Yeah.
that. There's probably other people in this room who had that experience.
Yeah.
But you went ahead and did it.
And I did it because it's what I was in a situation.
Yeah. So learning about conscious choice, what did that do for your spiritual growth, but what did it do for to the way you started approaching your life? What did it do for you?
Yeah, well, first,
To you.
eliminating, like I said earlier, like what I didn't want. And really the shoulds in life. That's where it all very much started, because growing up in a very, I call it tribal family, there's all these shoulds and pressures that are put upon us. And it's like, no, I don't have to do that if I don't want to. And so my mother dying was my freedom, right? It's like I was able to be free. And a girlfriend of mine that from high school had said to me, this is shortly after my mother died, she says, Teresa, they say when your mother dies that you're set free. And I was offended. I didn't appreciate that. But it wasn't till time went on that I realized.
You figured it out?
Yeah, that there was so much truth to that.
Yeah, there is.
Yeah.
Yeah. So did you start going to classes, or were you just mostly doing books? How were you working this whole program?
Yeah. So what happened was in 2004, I was, you pick up books and you read, and I would do some classes and stuff. But what really struck me is that when I learned about the woman Carolyn Mace, and a lot of people have heard about her. So in 2004, I signed up to attend her Sacred Contracts coursework, and I knew that that was going to change my life. I just knew it. And so I went off to Chicago, and that's where I'd go every 4 months. We'd go to Chicago and do the work there. And when we started studying about archetypes, and I started really learn about my victim archetype, my prostitute, and all of you've heard me talk about that in workshops. But that work right there is what was pivotal for me. And that's when I discovered that I was being called to do work in this area. I went to find out about myself. I had no idea what the path that it was going to be, that it was taking me on.
So you never finished beauty school, and you never
Oh, I
worked?
did.
Oh, you, so
I
you,
went
you did go back. So
I
you,
had a successful career
Okay.
as a cosmetologist. My ex-husband and I, yes, we had a couple hair salons. Life was, I was having fun, and we were doing well financially. And then that split apart when my mother passed away. And then fast forward, then that's when I went into another long-term relationship. And shortly after I started that coursework in 2004, about 2 weeks later, that abruptly ended. But that was also part of my work there. That was extremely painful for me, that relationship. But that was also part of the transformation.
it's amazing how many relationships just go kafooey when you start on your.
That's right.
I think kafooey is a nice spiritual word. Thank you very much. But that happens. Your friends change, your relationships change. Yeah, and then so you're going along and you're doing this and this, and then somewhere along the way you hit. What were you doing before you hit astrology?
Well, in 2004, okay, so Eileen Lauer, many of you know Eileen Lauer, right? So I was doing Eileen's hair. I've done it for years. So she came in one day to the salon and said, "Hey, Teresa, what's your birth time and all of that?" And I've always kind of been interested in astrology, but I didn't do anything about it. And so I gave her my information, and she ended up calling me later that day, and she said, "Teresa, I'm having a reading in about 2 days, and I think you should take that reading. Because I just looked at your chart, and I think you should go in there." And I'm like, "Okay, I'll do it." And when I went in for that reading, it was like I was validated, and I learned things that I had always felt about myself that I had never, I thought I was I don't want to say crazy, but I just thought it's like, yeah, it's okay. I'm really okay. This is innately part of who I am. And so that's what got me into starting to study astrology, because I wanted to know more about me. It wasn't that I set out to be an astrologer. It's just, I just want to know more about me.
So your entire path really has been about finding it about you.
Exactly.
And then because you're a natural teacher, you just turn it right back out around and share it with people.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the astrology, I mean, I never really studied it, but I knew a couple of really good astrologers, and my experience was that it wasn't a thing about telling me when it was safe to go outside or when it was safe to go buy, a green car or anything, but I was going into a very, very difficult astrological period. And he explained to me what those energies or those tendencies were, and it made a huge difference in the next 4 years. And so I always have appreciated it from that point of view, but that wasn't my calling to do it that way. I do it, and I do my thing another way. So so from that point on, was that the trajectory that you took? Or, I mean, and was this all this linear? Because it sounds pretty linear.
What do you mean by, I mean,
Well,
know what linear
was it
means.
just one thing happening or another? Or was it sort of a little bit messier than that?
No, it was actually pretty synchronistic. So I got that reading, I started saying, "Hey, I want to study astrology." And then the Carolyn Mace workshop came up. So then I went to, started studying that, and then she used the astrological wheel in her teaching. I'm like, "Hey, I'm already familiar with that." And then by year 3 of doing this work, we did a chart reading with archetypes, and it was a fate and destiny chart she had us cast. And it was at the end of that casting of that chart that I realized I'm supposed to be doing this work. And so a good friend of mine that I met while I was there said to me, "Teresa, I think that you should go do a coaching program because you need something to put all the umbrella this under." Because I knew that at the time, if I went out and said that I'm a spiritual something, it was like it just wasn't going to be, it wasn't going to sit right. And so I was struggling with myself even just coming out, because I hadn't come out to everybody, just to my people that I felt safe with. But like my clients, my hair clients, they didn't know what I was doing.
Well, yeah, because then they would think they had a really woo-woo hairstylist.
Right.
And she's in all that weird stuff. Yeah. So, yeah, coming out and doing this publicly takes a big step.
That was a really big, hard step, and I hid for a long time. I did. I hid for quite some time, and not letting people really know my true beliefs of how I felt. And it actually just hasn't been more until the recent past that, I think it's constant. It's constant, like a constant. Well, give me a second to describe this. mindfulness of saying, this is who I am. It's almost like saying that inside all the time. And this is who I am. And this is who I am.
And it's perfectly okay to be who I am.
Yeah.
And that's the part when we have the training of the shoulds and the have tos.
Yeah.
And if you don't do it this way, you're not good enough to be put on, essentially put on your own path and have to come in, grow into that path.
Right.
Because it really is a matter of growing into the path, isn't it? Because even if you're on it, it takes a long time to accept it and get comfortable with it.
Yeah. And I remember when I was, back from that time from 2004 to 2007, I remember literally one time I was in there in the class and I just kept saying, I am just so sick of myself. I'm so sick of myself because I'm living in two worlds simultaneously. I have one world in this world, one foot in this world and the other one in the spiritual world. What are you going to do, Teresa? What are you going to do? Are you going to step all in? Are you going to be all in? And that was a big transition place for me to just say, yeah, I'm all in. And then accepting that within me, and then eventually putting it out there to everybody to say, yeah, this is who I am. Yeah, that's right. I'm an astrologer. Yep, okay. You can have all the judgments around that. I don't believe in astrology, stuff, that sort of thing, yeah.
So are you comfortable with that identity now?
I'm comfortable. So what's interesting is, astrology is so vast in its information. And I think just over the past year, I've become more comfortable with the fact that accepting that I can't know everything about it. I can't know everything about it, and I've decided I'm not even going to feel bad or not necessarily feel bad, but not feel like I'm enough because I don't know everything about it. I know what I need to know to help the people that I help. And, intuitively, that's one of my superpowers. It's like I can read really well energy. And so it's like, I don't, you're not the chart. Let me back up because I'm kind of going all over, but this has a point to it. One of the things that, and actually JG and I were just having this conversation, and it is about being a clear channel, and that you do not need to have a tool in order for you to get to the information you need to get to. And that's what's come just really clear for me even more. So, the chart is great. I use it as a tool, but it's not the end all be all.
Oh, that's really clear to me when you did my reading. It was like, okay, here it is, and let's talk about you. And for my own personal work, I had when people were trying to encourage me to start doing my thing, they gave me a tarot deck, and it was like I looked at it and I got so hooked into what everything was supposed to mean, I couldn't do anything. And as soon as you took all that away from me, it was there. Mm-hmm. And yet having the chart there, in some respects, it helps people ground to something.
Yes.
And give them a frame of reference. I think maybe that's give them a frame of reference for what you're talking about.
Absolutely, and I think that's what helps people is that they're able to have some kind of structure from which to attach it to, and not in a bad way of attaching, just to understand it on a more grounded level. Mm-hmm.
Give an example of that is this incident I was talking about is that I had this point in my life where I had that reading, and I was getting ready to have Pluto conjunct my sun, and the man told me, he said, you're probably going to feel like you're dying. And I remember one day I was sitting in my car, and I didn't feel like I was physically dying. I didn't feel like I was going to keel over, but at the same time, there was part of me that felt like I was dying, because this is an energy that just transforms you, and it's very, very slow.
Yes.
And having that perspective helped me get through and actually use that time, as opposed to going,
Absolutely,
right?
yes.
And I think that's what you do with people, is that you help them.
Yeah, I think that I guess people, I think that I feel like I help people make sense of their life and what's happening. And, not in the literal sense of knowing why, but more in a abstract way of understanding the greater purpose and meaning of things in the bigger picture. And that's what I think I bring, is I can bring that, help people to have that perspective. Because I really feel that a lot of my work, and my work personally, has been around the victim archetype. And so helping people to see that from that we are not at the effect of it. It's not happening, as they say, to us, it's happening for us.
So everything in your life has happened for you,
Absolutely.
and you seem to have really grown into that very, very gracefully. Are there things that you would? Well, I'm not even sure what to ask anymore. Although you and I could probably sit and talk for hours.
Yeah.
What is it that you would like? Where would you like to see yourself go with this work? How would you like to see yourself in a few years? What is it that you? Where do you think you're going?
Yeah, where do I think I'm going? So I'm going to answer that question from the perspective of where I think my soul is calling me to go, because I think that's important to say it that way for how I'm going to answer this. I feel like I'm called out to continue to speak, and I feel I'm called out as I speak to teach. We talked about that a little bit earlier. I have been given the ability to, I think, put pieces together that I see that happen, not only just collectively but individually for people, and I feel like I'm here to speak, to be a truth teller, and be a truth teller of speaking of things that most people. And I'm not saying in this community at all, because we can talk about soul, we can have these deep conversations, but there's a lot of people out there that aren't having those conversations, and I feel like that's what I'm here to do. I'm here to kind of break and bridge the gap between, those of us that are kind of hidden in rooms versus, like the mass people out there. So that's where I feel like I'm headed, and I also feel like that it's kind of like I call it the mystic archetype, where I'm being asked to do things and I don't necessarily have a choice. And I don't mean choice from the place of that we don't have a choice in the literal way, but either I can answer the call or not. And I'm at a place where it's like, are you kidding? I say to myself, are you kidding me? This is what you're going to ask me to do? And you do it and you follow.
Yeah, because no isn't really an option.
Right. It's not.
Even if you're sitting there going, I really don't want to do this, no is not an option. It's
Right.
just, okay, I'm going to do this now.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's the place that I have arrived at just over the past year. It's that you, like you said, no is not an option, no matter how scary it is. It's all part of the growth. And
at the same time, you don't feel like you're being forced into it. It's
No.
just, it's really hard to describe
Yeah.
this sense. And maybe some of you have had that same sense. It's like, okay, I'm not sure this is going to be comfortable, but in fact, you don't even want to do anything different.
Right.
Even though it seems like you're climbing a big mountain or something, there's no desire to do something different.
No.
Yeah.
No. When I had told my hair clients that I was going to be quitting doing hair, a couple of them said, "Well, you can always fall back on hair if it doesn't work out." And I said, "Oh no, I'm not. I'm not falling back on that. I'm moving forward. There's nothing I want to fall back on here."
And of course, they're talking about their own fears.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Every once in a while, someone come to me and say, "Someone said blah blah blah," and I said, "Remember that whenever someone says something like to you, they're talking about themselves, not you." And that was their fears. You had your own fears, I'm sure, but
Absolutely.
but they were yours.
Yes.
So, what kind of? Where do we have some time? Maybe go ahead and open this up to questions. We have a lot of time for questions. Go for it. Really?
Okay.
What were the name of some of the books that you read when you were getting started?
Okay, some of the books that for me that changed my life, of course, was Quantum Physics with Deepak Chopra, You Can Heal Your Life by Louise Hay, Energy Anatomy by Carolyn Mace. That was one of my big ones. And then it was Sacred Contracts by Carolyn Mace. Let's see, what else did I mean, there was lots of them. What I can't even say her name. Yes, thank you. Yes, Yes, I loved her name. I loved her books, period. And then, of course, Judith Anadea. You know, I consider her to be like the guru of the chakra system. So, I mean, I still study her books and use her books in my work today. So that's the Bible, I think, of the chakra system.
Other questions? This is usually a very inquiring, really Teresa Campos in 40 minutes. So, all right. So I'm going to ask you some questions about astrology.
Oh, she has one. Carol
good,
has one.
Good.
Well, I have more of a.
You're on.
I have more of a statement. I think anyone who's looking to find out who they are authentically should talk to Teresa. I know I had a reading. I didn't like it at first, but you know, and then I joined her monthly group for a time. I'm on hiatus right now from that, but it just really helped me because I kept thinking about what she was saying to me, and it started to penetrate. And then it brought me to a place where I thought, okay, I can do this. I can be who I'm supposed to be. So it's just a plug for Teresa's work because it's really pretty cool. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Oh, all right. Thank you.
Teresa, what would you say to the little Teresa as you are now? What would you say to her?
So JG knows me intimately, so let me think about that for a second. What would I say? I think I would say that you got this. You got this. And the reason why I say that is, so as a little girl, about age 2, I started wearing glasses. And I started wearing glasses because one of my eyes started to cross. It was crossing, so one eye would go. I had myopia. And so I started wearing those glasses, and then by the time I was 6 years old, they didn't want to do surgery. My mother did not want to do surgery, so I had to wear a patch on my eye. So I was always kind of targeted, right? But I was always wanting to play really hard and get out, and do my thing and be active. But there was always this kind of holding myself back for fear of, my mother was so worried about me getting bullied and picked on that it created the victim for that in me. And I probably wouldn't have had it because children don't know any different, right? They don't know any different until somebody shows them there's something different. And so that turned it for me where, she would tell my older sister, you better keep an eye on your sister and don't let anybody pick on her. And so I was like, I was always on the defense. And so I grew up that way, even in stepping into my own, sense of empowerment is like, but I've got to be on my guard. What if somebody, ridicules me or I say something wrong or whatever that is? So I think that's what I would say is that you got this. You got it. Thank you for asking me that.
Teresa, I know you do, what do you call them, classes? Or what you do on a regular basis with your group?
Oh, the monthly group, yeah.
The monthly group, you do it once a month?
I do it now twice a month. We're doing it twice a month.
And how many groups do you have?
I just have one. I've been considering starting another one in January, but I don't want to spread myself too thin. I really enjoy the group that I have, and we just seem there's a nice cohesiveness to the group, and I like to keep things intimate. So if we do, get too big, then I'm going to probably start another one. But for now, I just keep the one.
Well, could you kind of give me an idea of what you do in those groups?
Yeah, so it's been kind of a process since this was a new concept that I created. I mean, I've had groups before where we're actually working on something in particular, but this one is much more organic. And right now, what I've been working on is the 12 labors of Hercules. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that in myth, but so Hercules, from a metaphor, like using it as a metaphor, there are 12 labors that Hercules in Greek mythology has been was set out to do, and these tasks were the tasks of the soul. Like, so in the first labor of Hercules, we studied about what does it mean to, in this labor where Hercules' job was to go out and to tame the wild horses. And the wild horses are our monkey mind. And so we just go into looking at that from a metaphoric perspective. So we've been doing that. So it's just more organic on what comes up and what the group feels like is, how I've organized this. You're welcome.
Hi, Teresa.
Hey, Elaine.
I know we've been really fortunate to not only have you originally, you and I met with you being at the expo and being a panel speaker and offering some awesome seminars there, but we've had the luxury of having you also be part of our shadow work here when we first had you come and do a class on shadow work and using astrology as the baby steps with astrology, and then we had you last year kind of take it to another level with us kind of looking more about our charts. As you see the evolution in our partnership here at Spiritual Life Center, is there something from a gut level organically that you feel might be the next level of what you feel to share, or another level of development that those of us here in this community, as we've worked with you, might be fitting for where we are as the collective and our raising of collective consciousness through what your gift is through astrology? I was piqued because Carolyn Mice and the archetypes is one of my favorites, and I don't know if that almost feels like going backwards, but at the same time I think that also might resonate. But just from a organic standpoint.
Yeah. What comes to mind when you ask that is, I really love talking about and teaching the archetypes. I mean, that I feel is just so transformational for us. And I'm actually starting to talk more about that just in my own work personally, because I haven't always integrated those as much as I wanted to. And I think that there are some archetypes that we haven't, that are coming into our culture that I think need to be talked about. When we could go back, we always go back to the victim and all those, survival archetypes, but there's other ones that are coming up. And one of them is that I keep talking about is the entrepreneur. And people don't think themselves as an entrepreneur, but the entrepreneur is the creative spirit within ourselves. And that's something that we're seeing in the culture, especially with the young people, right? And the other one that I'm talking a lot about is the servant leader. Is it's not just about the servant and the leader, it's the servant leader. So what does this archetype bring for us in our culture and the community? And, when it comes to being of service of and how, it's even deeper than giving back. I had this thought yesterday when I was at a networking group, and a lot of people, when I go to these networking groups, they'll talk about, I want to give back, and I understand that. And it's like, yeah, but see, the personality wants to give back. The soul just gives. And that's the point I want to get across to people, right? And so it's like, we just give. There's no ego personality in this, even if it comes from a good place. So, in talking about these archetypes, same with the entrepreneur, it's like, it is the creative spirit within us. We all have an inner entrepreneur. So anyway, that's kind of where I'm going with my work right now of, just bringing it more to a more current collective, relationship that people can, just relate to easier.
Spiritual freedom, personal freedom,
Yeah.
being who you are, and being okay with that.
Yeah. Exactly. One of the things I also like to say is that the more individualized we become, really the more connected we become. And so the old paradigm has been the opposite, right? Is that we need to segregate and be tribes, but I talk about the shadow of the tribe. Let's talk about the shadow of the tribe archetype and how even in, how is there shadow in this community of the tribe? It's everywhere.
Well, yeah, because we all huddle. And it's so easy to get stuck, I think.
Yeah.
And always looking at how am I getting stuck, and what are ways that, and that's why one of the things I like about astrology and just what you're teaching is it helps us bring to our awareness where we're stuck and then gives us ways to become unstuck. It's like one of the things that Brene Brown says in her book is that she doesn't do how to, because we all know how to eat right. We all know how to take care of ourselves, but we don't do it.
Right.
And so getting teaching ourselves to do it and giving ourselves permission. Because
Right.
I think a lot of times it's about giving ourselves permission to be who we are.
Absolutely. I agree. And just to add, Elaine, to answer that question, the other piece that comes up, it just kind of popped in, is that why I titled the talk, Why I Didn't Wait for God, was, it's kind of a fun thing, I thought, number one, and kind of, provocative a little bit. And, there was literal truth to that. And then there's also truth to that in that when we get into this feeling or way of mindset, I'm going to call it a mindset of that I'm going to wait for Spirit to give me the answer. A lot of times that there's shadow in that. And so let's not wait for God. And I don't mean that literally, but I mean that figuratively, like taking action. And that's what I've learned over this past year. I can't wait around. I've been waiting around for the universe to support me, and it becomes where I'm being enabled by the universe, on some level. And I'm saying this, of course, tongue in cheek, but we have to take the action and just do what we know what we're called to do. And that's what I'm talking about. The personality is going to wait around, but the soul just knows it's about continuous movement forward.
Yeah, because God's waiting for us. We're not.
That's right.
When we're waiting for God,
That's
we're going to be
right.
waiting forever. Teresa, this has been a great, great conversation.
Thank
you.
you.
It always goes so fast. But I really appreciate your coming tonight, and thank you
you.
so much for sharing your path with us.
Thank you very much. Thank you for wanting to even hear me. I appreciate that.
And so we move now to the love offering time, and knowing that giving and receiving are all part of the same cycle, and that as we give and we receive, it just keeps on going, and it goes out and out into the world until we are all one. So let us say our offering blessing together. Divine love, as me, blesses and multiplies all that I am, all that I have, and all that I circulate. Thank you, God.
Thank you, 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 thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Pouring down, your love is pouring down. Your love is pouring down. Your love is pouring down. Thank you.
So let's stand and make a circle and hold hands and I have to say that it is so cool that everybody has started singing along with that song, especially the part dance part. It is a singable song. Thank you again, Teresa, so much for being with us. Let's take a deep breath and say our prayer for protection together. The light of God surrounds us. The love of God enfolds us. The power of God protects us. The presence of God watches over us. Wherever we are, God is, and all is well. And may the joys of the world go with you. Good night. Oh, Healing Circle next door.